Listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah, here streaming live from the Beaver Hills section of New Haven, Connecticut. It is Wednesday morning. You know this because this is your Wednesday morning voice. Again, we have a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous day today. Gorgeous day here in New Haven, Connecticut. It's probably almost 80 degrees already, and it is 10 a.m. We finally got a full summer. I think this week may have been, the last week and a half, may have been the first full summer week that we've had since the seasons have changed and the weather has changed. So we are excited. Well, at least I'm excited. I don't know if everybody else is excited, but I'm like really, really excited. I've been waiting. I much rather prefer warm weather to cold weather, which is actually quite strange since I live in New England. And I have lived in New England since I was probably about 8 years old. Yeah, probably about 8 years old. And I've lived here periodically even before those 8 years. So today we are talking, and I decided to do a talk back episode today. So today we are talking, and you get the opportunity to call in and give me your opinion on some of the things that we are going to talk about. So we are specifically talking today about strong black woman syndromes, the aspiration and overwhelm of being a strong black woman. What does that mean? What are the results of it and the consequences of it? Since it is Minority Mental Health Month, I thought that it would be a really good topic to talk about, particularly when it comes to, because we want to really bring some light to black women and mental health. We'll have some guests coming on the show as well to talk about it. But today I wanted to talk to you and see what that means to you. So I'll tell you a little bit about what it means to me and why I felt like it was a really important topic, because I come from a long line of strong black women. And it is a self-diagnosed and self-inflicted title when you talk about being a black woman and being a strong black woman. I say that because, like, I am number 5 of 6 children. We only have one brother. The rest of us are girls, and literally our WhatsApp sisters group is like Superwoman, strong black woman, something like that. We have entitled ourselves that, and it coming from a history of and a childhood of where we looked at our mom as a strong black woman and what that entails. So that isn't always a negative thing. There are certainly some positives. There is some necessities to it for being black in America, particularly a black woman in America. Being a strong black woman is what has helped black families survive. During slavery, since slavery, black women were often placed as the head of the household because their husbands, fathers, significant others being taken away during the time of slavery, and even after slavery during Jim Crow and the time when it was very difficult for, black men to get jobs, and women sustained the household. We know that right after slavery was over and Jim Crow was implemented, and prisons became the new way to enslave black men and to get free work. Many black women were left, and they had no, or and their spouses taken away, and they had no other option but to be a strong black woman. Today, that residual effect has affected black women in a way where it puts us in a position of how people view us, how we view ourselves, and how we view the other women around us. Like it's so, and it's really, I guess in a way, it's a little strange, but in a way, a little necessary that it has become so ingrained into the black culture that there actually research around it. Like, what does it mean when women say that they are strong black women, and how does that actually affect their mental health? And so there's been some research about it. So there's one, there's one research study that talked about the idea of being a strong black woman, and actually self-titling yourself is strongly correlated with depression and anxiety. So what does that mean? So let's talk a little bit about kind of the societal impressions of being a black woman in America. So there's 3 views that a lot of people have that are stereotypes about black women. And stereotypes become important because it is something that society places upon a person or a group of people, and it really does affect the way that you navigate through the world. It affects the way that some people relate to you, and how you have to interact with people who may feed into these stereotypes. So black women are looked at as one of 3 things. Strong black women, right? Those are the women who they take care of everything and everyone, and they are the ones that you can depend on no matter what. Oftentimes, we refer to our grandmothers and our mothers in this respect, right? So I have always viewed my mom as a strong black woman. She was a single parent for a large part of my childhood. She took care of everyone. My mother was, no lie, like the Muslim Mother Teresa. She took everyone in. I can, if there was an uncle who was getting out of rehab and wanted to leave New York and come and place himself in a different environment so that he can better his life, she was the person that they went to. If there was a cousin who was taken away from their parents by DCF, she was the person that took them in. Throughout my entire life, I always had somebody live. We always had somebody who was not of our nucleus family living with us, meaning not a brother or a sister. There was always an aunt, a cousin, a friend. My mother was that woman that everybody leaned on. And, in retrospect, when I think about it and I think back on those days and what I know now as an adult, and as somebody who's very conscious of self-care, very conscious of emotional health and mental health, I realized that we kind of looked at her as somebody who didn't really need other people. Everybody needed her. I think I can remember maybe, I would say, a handful of times, maybe 5 times in my entire life, I can remember seeing my mom cry. There was, and I recognized this pretty early on in my parenting life, that I did not want my kids to view me as kind of like this superwoman. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be looked at as reliable, but it was really important that my kids didn't view me as somebody that didn't have emotions, somebody who didn't need anything. I'm not sure if I actually succeeded in doing that, but that was hopefully my goal. So, in being a strong black woman, it is something that your family really relies on. So, that's kind of like one view of being a black woman. On the other hand, another way of that society view black women in general is somebody who is quote unquote the angry black woman, right? The angry black woman is somebody that will curse you out before you get a chance to say anything. We have entire movies and caricatures that's built around it. Tyler Perry's Medea is what comes to mind when I think of kind of like the angry black woman. And we know now, as I said, that it has been so much of our culture that there's research done on it, and psychologists who have looked at it, and they talk about how this persona of being an angry black woman can actually be the outward expression of anxiety and depression, right? So for many black women who have this kind of this built up anger that does not resolve itself, right? Or they don't make effort to resolve it, it can actually be signs of anxiety and depression that are specific to black women, something a way. And so again, this is kind of when cultural differences shows its head, is the way that black women may express symptoms of anxiety, depression may be different than other cultures. Sort of like the way that women's signs of heart attack is different than a man, right? So we have these different expressions of illnesses, both physical and psychological, and that is one of the ways that black women actually can express anxiety. Like they don't know how to deal with the unknown, don't know how to deal with situations that may be difficult, and so it comes out as a form of anger. And the third way, we know that black women themselves have been, black woman society has put this third view of black women being very sexualized, being a Jezebel, right? So interestingly enough, Jezebel is actually a term that comes from the Bible, and she was someone who led her husband away from God. So that's where the term Jezebel comes from. And so black women have been very sexualized as well, which is something that many black women, not all, but many black women, particularly educated black women, really try to dispel as a stereotype. But again, this can also be a result of emotional and mental anxiety for many. In my mind, I think of young black women today in particular. That may be a little ageist, I'm going to admit, but I more often see this stereotype playing out among young people. I should say that. I don't know if that was politically correct, but it's radio, so, and it's live, so I may not be politically correct sometimes. So when we talk about just the idea of kind of like these stereotypes and how black women, those are stereotypes, and how black women themselves have to contend with those stereotypes, right? So when you are inside of a meeting or walking around your job, anytime you aren't smiling, a black woman isn't smiling, people may perceive those things about her. They may say, oh, she's angry, right? Where simply you're just not smiling. You have just no smile on your face. You may be thinking about something, but those stereotypes can be pressed upon you. And it's really important. So I'll give you, let's talk about an example. So oftentimes, and I've had this conversation with some colleagues of mine who really specialize in communication and using your voice to combat discrimination. And one of the things that often happens, particularly when Black women find themselves, which we often do, find ourselves either as the only or the first in whatever situation. We see this on the news all the time. Even though it's 2019, we see, hey, this is the first. The first thing that comes to my mind is Johanna Hayes, here in Connecticut, is the first Black woman to represent Connecticut as a congresswoman in Washington, D.C., right? So often we are still seeing the first Black woman, the first Black person. And even if you're not the first, you will find yourself as the only in particular circumstances. And when you are in those circumstances, I know I have found myself personally in situations where people say things that may be discriminatory. People say things or use language that may be divisive. And when you speak up as a Black woman or a black person, and a Black woman in particular, then you can be viewed as kind of like oversensitive, blowing it out of proportion, the angry Black woman. So that actually is a really important time to have your voice for people who are allies, people who are also Black in the room, if you're not the only one. That is a time for other people to really stand up and voice their consensus with you, right? So it's really not about simply, I'm just going to side with her because she's Black, or I'm going to side with her because she's been offensive. So I was in a particular circumstance in a meeting, and someone said something, and I'm sure that I have no doubt that she was intentionally being racist, but she said something racist. So that is a really clear that I have to point that out as a very clear understanding that you do not have to be intentionally racist to be racist. You too may have some racism in you, even if you consciously don't hate Black people. Just want to say that for the record. So this particular person said something that was racist, and I did speak up about it, and I said, that language is divisive, and here's a different way to phrase it. Because I'm sure I did not suspect her of doing it intentionally. And after the meeting, several people came up. So no one seconded my opinion. But after the meeting, several people came up to me and said, oh, I'm so glad you said something. Oh, yes, that wasn't right. Oh, it's important that you said what you said to bring attention to the fact that it was discriminatory what she said. But yet during the meeting, none of those people said anything to second my opinion, right? And I think that is an example of, how Black women, I felt like, some people were looking at me as if I was being too sensitive. People who would normally have conversation with me after the meeting kind of didn't. And I felt they were like on the other side of the room, staying there. And that's an example of kind of like one of those times when, as a Black woman, when you speak up, your opinion is sort of overlooked, or it is not validated. And as a result, for some Black women, they won't speak up, because some of these people who came to me after the meeting were Black women. I was not the only Black woman in the room, but I was the only one who said something. And when you are in a situation like that and you are not validated through people basically having your back, then you can be viewed as an angry Black woman. And as juxtaposed to that is some people, particularly Black women, they will hold their tongue and they will not say what they're feeling just to avoid being looked at as an angry Black woman. And that in itself is actually the way that you have this buildup and it turns into anxiety and depression because of that buildup of not being able to express yourself, not being able to say, and not, that you want to, oh, I'm going to have depression if I don't go off on everybody. Of course, we don't mean that, but at least being able to express yourself. So, today is a call-in show, and you can actually call in and you can tell me about your experience or your opinion about what does being a strong Black woman mean to you. What benefits and costs has it cost? And the number is 203-988-6481. Again, 203-988-6481 if you want to call in and join the conversation. When we talk about, before I continue, I just want to remind you that you're listening to Mornings with Mubarakah on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah. You are tuning in on TuneIn Radio, maybe Facebook Live, maybe my Instagram Live. You may also be on Periscope or Stream Me. We are on about a half a dozen social media video streams. In addition to that, we are on, if you've missed any part of the show or any part of the past shows, you can actually go to SoundCloud or iTunes, and everything is archived as a podcast. Just look for WNHHLP. And scroll down the list of all of our awesome hyper-local radio shows and look for Mornings with Mubarakah, and you can find us there. So we are talking today about the strong Black woman syndrome, and we are talking about the aspiration and the consequences of it. So what it means to be a strong Black woman, what are the benefits, and what are sometimes the consequences of being a strong Black woman. In that vein, let's talk a little bit about kind of like what the research tells us about what happens when we self-title ourselves strong Black woman, when we have this both internal and external pressure of being a strong Black woman. We see ourselves as being everything to everyone, and as a result, often we're successful at that. And then everyone else then expect us to be everything to everyone. So this is something I remember particularly listening to, and I don't remember the young woman's name, but I was listening to a conference online. I can't remember what it was. And one of the things that the young woman said, she must have been in her 20s, and she started talking about kind of like this idea of being a strong Black woman. And it's something that's been said by her grandmother, that's been said by her mother, that her and her sisters talk about being a strong Black woman. And she's like, I have no idea what that means or how to even start doing that. Like, what does that mean that you're a strong Black woman? Does it mean that you don't feel? Does it mean that you don't cry? Does it mean that you don't need? What is it? What do you do? And if you have to be those things, what do you do with all of those human characteristics that you are expected not to express, right? So this happens a lot when we think about the way that we interact and respond to the oppression, violence, and trauma that happens to the Black community, right? So we have this constant onslaught of our men and women being shot, being abused, being killed. We have this idea of Black people in America just being almost a third class, definitely a second class citizen. I guess that can be argued. But yet we live here and we have to function on a daily basis. So how exactly do you do that? How exactly do not only we as the Black community, but also our allies, our support system. I was on a panel at Yale Hospital once, and the president to the Bridgeport Hospital actually asked a very profound question, and I was quite impressed with just the fact that he as a white man began to think about this. It's a shame that it would be such a rarity that it impressed me, but it was. And what we were talking about is at the time, it was soon after Jason Negron in Bridgeport was shot and killed. He was a young man that was shot and killed in Bridgeport, Connecticut by the police there. And he asked, as the president of the hospital, how does he recognized that black women and women of color would be significantly affected by this particular situation and situations like this. And he wanted to know, as their boss, how does he respond to his employees when things like that happen? And I thought it was quite thoughtful of him. And my response to him was, recognize that they may be affected when they come into work the next day. Recognize that you may need to offer additional mental health support and make them feel like it's okay, like it's not a punishment, oh, take off from work, go home, don't get paid kind of thing, but offer it to them as a service, because when your employees' mental health is stronger, they are going to better be able to navigate through their day, perform better at work. All of those things is really important. When we talk about how our environment, being that at work, being that at school, can respond and support, I think that first it's important that we remove this particular stereotype, right? So one of the things that happens when this stereotype is applied is sometimes it actually works against us, and sometimes it actually works for us. So when we think about the idea of black women being strong black women, it's not only about mental strength. It's not only about they aren't perceived as just being emotionally stronger or an emotional stone, right? There is even a stereotype in the medical community of black women being physically stronger, having a higher tolerance of pain. So this results in, so they've done research studies and they found that when black people come into the emergency room versus their white counterparts, black people are less likely to be given painkillers. They're less likely to be given stronger painkillers. This is actually the interesting thing, how this actually affects. And I was speaking to a public health expert once on my show, and I asked her, I said, is this one of the reasons why in this opioid crisis that we have in the United States, that it is ravishing the white community much more than the black community? And she concurred. She said, yeah, that is actually a residual effect of it, that black people are less likely to be, not that there aren't black people who are addicted to opioids, we know that there are, but in percentage wise, black people are less likely to be given stronger pain management medication like opioids because of this stereotype, even within the medical community, even within a community that is supposedly teaching doctors to treat people according to their symptoms, according to their illness, irregardless of their racial or ethnic background. There is, because doctors are human, and there is an inherent bias in every single human being. So we are talking about the difference between black and white. So I see Arshia on Facebook. Her comment is, being black and white is nothing. We should be stronger women so that we can fit the world. So I interested in perspective, but unfortunately, in the real world that we live in, being black or white makes a huge difference, not just in America, but in every country. There are not just physical difference, there are cultural differences, there are perception differences, there are differences in the way that we interact with one another. And this isn't to say that one is better than the other. Again, it's not about pretending like we don't see color, because color exists, right? I don't want you to look at me and pretend like I'm clear. I'm clearly black, right? I clearly have a lot of melanin. I want you to see that. I want you to respect that. I want you to know that there are life experiences and interactions that is the result of that, that my heritage, that my lineage will both forever carry the experiences that are attached to my black skin. So black and white does make a difference. Doesn't make one better than the other, but definitely different. Sort of kind of like equal and fair. People interchange them, but they aren't the same thing, right? So that's sort of kind of like being black and white. Yeah, everybody's human, but your ethnicity, your nationality, your skin color, it all is going to be, in a large part affect the way that you navigate through the world and your relationships. So I think it's important that we recognize that, and we don't try to be so politically correct to say that it doesn't matter, when in the real world it does. We wish it didn't, but in the real world it does. So if you are just tuning in, we are actually talking about strong black woman syndrome. And if you want to join in the conversation, you can actually give me a call at 203-988-6481. And you can join the conversation and let me know, what does it mean? What does that term mean to you? Has it benefited you, or have you had consequences because of this perception of being a strong black woman? So I wanted to talk a little bit of kind of like, what does it mean to, what has the research shown us, right? So when we look at research, if you follow me for any amount of time, you know I'm always finding a research study to attach to anything that I talk about. Because I believe in science. And one of the things that I think that is really important is, that we recognize, like, we are in an age of information. This will definitely be considered the age of information. And in that age of information, we don't have to guess about things. We have ways that we can make qualitative and quantitative analysis. We have technology. We have ways to research the physiological effects of everything from drug to herb to what people say to you, right? And to mental health. We have all of this analysis. And I think that it will help us better to understand ourselves and understand how to interact with our community and interact with the people around us. Really important. So there was a study done by Jasmine Abrams, who is a professor of the University of Maryland in Baltimore County, and an affiliate professor at Yale University School of Public Health. And in her research, she found that participants who agreed with the statements like black women have to be strong to survive tended also agree with self-silencing statements, as in a close relationship, my responsibility is to make the others happy, right? We know that as the people pleasers, right? So many women, so this is a contrast to the kind of like the angry black woman syndrome versus the strong black woman syndrome. The angry black woman syndrome is, oh, I don't have to make anybody happy. Strong black woman syndrome is, I need to make everybody happy. So what that means is I may not be able to express myself. We know that we have code switching, right? So something that is specifically to the minority communities and people of color is something that's called code switching. If you are not aware of that, what code switching is people can change their demeanor. People of color, black people in particular, change their demeanor, change the way that they speak, the dialect that they speak, the words that they use based on the environment that they're in. So, speaking to your white colleagues at work may be completely different than you speaking to your girlfriends at home or your children or your husband, right? In terms of the wording that you use, even in terms of how you pronounce your words, right? So not just the words that you're choosing, but also how you pronounce your words, your dialect. If you particularly have a particular dialect, sort of like you have a heritage from Jamaica or from Haiti or from one of the Caribbean islands, you may be able to go from using that particular dialect when you are speaking with friends and family to using quote unquote the King's English when you are in a professional situation. And that switch doesn't just come with the words that you're choosing to use. It also may come with how you are choosing to express yourself, or if you are expressing yourself at all, or your particular opinion at all in your interactions. So again, if I say this, will I be perceived as an angry black woman? If I say this, how will it be? How will this create a reputation for myself? Right? It's very different, and it's not just. And so let me be clear. There's differences between the way black women express themselves versus the way other cultures express themselves. We have stereotypes, but we also have things that are actually, though some of those stereotypes are not without merit, right? So for many black women, being forthright has been the way that you just really need to be. There's no way of you, like, beating around the bush doesn't serve you well. And so they've learned to be forthright, but then recognizing that when you code switch, you can't necessarily be forthright, right? And so that is a stifling of your voice in many respects. Another thing that people who agreed that black women needed to be strong in order to survive, they also agreed that they really express their anger to those close to them, right? So you may know somebody, or maybe it's you, that constantly withholds, and then you can only withhold for so long before you explode. Or before it actually internalizes into anxiety, depression, self-harm. Like, black people suffer from self-harm as well. The rise of young black girls in particular committing self-harm, the rise of young black teens committing suicide has shot up astronomically in the last 8 years, right? So there is a really a national health emergency in America for the rise of these two things. It's not being talked about often, and we do need to bring those things to the forefront. I think that's why it is important. I used to say, like, why do we have to have like a month for everything, right? You have Minority Mental Health Month, you have Black History Month, you have Hispanic History Month, you have this month, you have that, you have Diabetes Awareness Month, you have HIV Awareness Month, you have all of these months, but when the thing that we are recognizing during that month is because any other month it may be overlooked, and this is our time in particular to bring it to the forefront, right? So when we talk about July being Minority Mental Health Month, these are the things that we need to talk about so that we can bring enough attention to it where we don't need a month just to particularly shine a light on it, right? So self-harm among young Black youth, suicide among young Black youth, those are really important topics that we need to bring to the forefront so that we can create solutions to them, because they are things that will bring detriment to our communities, to our families. It's really important that we talk about those things today. As we talk about kind of like this strong Black woman syndrome, we have to recognize that the idea of this is put inside of girls' heads really early. I had a phone call from my kid's pediatrician, not about my kids, but she called me just to ask me, and she's a white woman, and she called me to ask me if there was any support or mentoring system for young Black girls. She said that she has been seeing this trend among her patients of young Black high school girls who are athletes, who are scholars. They're doing phenomenal academically, phenomenal in terms of their athleticism, because they recognize, and they've been told, and they have lived a lifestyle of, I have to be twice as good to get half as far, right? And so that is what they're doing. But as a result, their emotional stress level, she said, is really to the point where they are going to need therapy. They actually need more mentorship to understand how to balance their goal setting with being able to take care of themselves mentally and physically. So she mentioned to me that some of these girls, like, their stress level is so high that they're literally losing their hair, right? So their hair is falling out because of the amount of stress academically and athletically that they put themselves under. And it's self-imposed pressure because they want to be the best, and they know to be the best, they can't just put their minimum effort in. No athlete, no matter what his nationality or her nationality is, puts in their minimal effort. However, particularly for Black athletes, Black student scholars, they have to put in an extra effort, right? We know this, right? There's research about it. And so the idea of knowing that this is something that starts really early, starts as early as 15 and 16 years old, this idea of, I have to be a strong Black woman, it really begs our attention of how we can break this cycle, and we can really get our young girls to recognize that there is a balance, that being a strong Black woman doesn't mean that you have to be everything to everybody. It doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your own happiness for other people. It does not mean that you need to be in a position where you are self-imposing, right? Self-imposing responsibilities, stress, situations that don't belong to you, that you are taking on other people's baggage. That is not being a strong Black woman. So this is a conversation that I would love for you to continue in the comments, that I would love to have. And if you live in the New Haven, Connecticut area, we've developed a monthly meeting for women of color called the Healing Circle. It's okay not to be okay, where we'll be meeting the second Wednesday of every month. You can check the Fit Muslima Facebook page for information on it. It is tonight at 7 p.m., 216 Crown Street. If you're a woman of color and you've been feeling particularly stressed and don't know how to manage it, and you need some support, or you just want to be in a safe space where you can express yourself, I invite you to come and to join us. We will each month be introducing different alternative methods of self-care and stress management. So we'll talk about a range of things. We'll talk about getting actual therapy. When do you think you might need that? We'll talk about Reiki and yoga and meditation. We'll talk about what's sound bathing, right? Well, so all of these things are on our list of topics to talk about. So I invite you to join me if you are in the New Haven, Connecticut area. Again, you can find the event on Facebook. It is the Women's Healing Circle. It's okay not to be okay. And that is the second Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. And we invite you to join us and join us within a safe space to talk about healing and self-care in communities of color. I want to thank you for listening today. It has been a pleasure, as always, to speak to you. And if you have not checked out our archive of shows, you can go to SoundCloud or iTunes, where all of our shows are archived and as podcasts, and you can look up Mornings with Mubarakah. And in the meantime, until next week, I encourage you to be a voice and not an echo. Have a lovely week.